Corinne Malcolm, rest day. We are back. How's it going after your little ski getaway?
Oh, it's good. I think I shivered all the water out of my body, all the body heat out of my body at Chuckanut, which we'll talk about in a little bit. On Saturday, I don't know if it was better to be a spectator or a racer that day. Probably neither, to be honest. But then, hit up the Mount Baker ski area for 2 days with my husband and a couple of our friends, and just like skied the deepest pow of my life in the backcountry. It was pretty awesome.
Little ski therapy after what was, yes, a weekend filled with shivering at the Chuckanut 50K. But what a great weekend it was, and so fun to finally experience it myself. Some really great racing in tough conditions. So maybe we just start there and then tick through the docket here today. We have a lot to talk about. Your boy is in race director mode now, Corinne. So getting ready for the Big Alta. The Barkley started this morning as we're recording. There was some news out of the Trailcon universe last week, so a lot to get to. But starting with Chuckanut, yes, Corinne, what a day it was. So maybe just you were running around on course, so maybe just share a little bit with the audience about what you were doing, what you observed, what your top line thoughts are coming out.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I started my trail and ultra running career really in the Bellingham area. The Chuckanut 50K was my first ever ultra, followed up quickly by Gorge in the same month period, basically. So I have a lot of love for Chuckanut. I lived in Bellingham for a number of years. I know that course backwards, forwards, sideways. And so if I'm not racing Chuckanut, I do like to be out there running and cheering. I've got a route that's, 8 to 12 miles where I can see the racers 5-6 times if I play my cards right. And I pop up everywhere, as you probably got to witness a little bit on race day. And it was super fun. So I had no responsibilities outside of yelling as loud as I possibly could. And it was the first time I've done it in full rain pants, full rain jacket, and was still just absolutely freezing the entire time.
Should we talk briefly about where I saw you last on the course before we start talking about some of the great performances?
That was a moment. I
was a little confused. I was a little confused. So maybe I'll set it up and then we'll hand it over to you, because I would love to hear about what happened after I left. I still haven't gotten the full story, but I'm just like ambling about out there in the woods. First of all, Chuckanut is a tricky course. Everybody knows
tricky.
It starts and finishes with a fast 10K on both ends of the course. So you pretty much start by leaving a little park in Fairhaven, just sprinting down the interurban trail, go through the first aid station, and then you go into the middle section of the course, which is really tough, like steep climbs, rocky, rooty, technical ridge line, some steep descents, and with the rain, obviously became a little treacherous in terms of balance and footing. And so just a tough middle section of the course. So you get 5,000 feet of vertical climbing and descending in about 18 miles. And then, of course, you finish with a very fast 10K again. So it rewards people who are well-rounded runners, I think, who have an equal mix of speed and strength and agility, dexterity, trail skills to incorporate into the middle section. And we'll talk about some of those well-rounded athletes. But I was just in front of the lead women going up the big climb. And then all of a sudden, Sarah Beal and Claire DeVoe come absolutely storming past me, probably about 8 or 9 miles into the race. And probably 10 miles after that, I'm just, cruising along, minding my own business, coming off the ridge. And all of a sudden I see Sarah Beal in the distance, and I come up to her. I say, "Hey, Sarah, you doing okay?" She's sort of, walk jogging, not looking great, looks at me, fully blue in the face, looks hypothermic, very cold, is basically shivering. So I'm like, "Hey, do you need my jacket?" After a couple of minutes, we managed to get the jacket on Sarah, and we continue moving down the trail towards an aid station where I saw you. But in between there, I bumped into some Good Samaritans on the trail, wondering if they had extra clothing as Sarah was sort of catching up to me. They didn't, but they had an emergency blanket. So we keep moving down the trail, and ultimately I ran a little bit ahead of Sarah to sort of let the aid station know that she was coming, and you were at the aid station. So what happened next? Because it was like a little bit of a survival situation out there.
And it was a survival situation for many, many runners. Actually, there were 3 women running within the top 5 who did not make it to the finish line somewhere in the last 10K to 10 miles, basically, where they had been running strong. It was good until it wasn't good type of thing. And Sarah Beal was one of those individuals who looked super strong, but was definitely getting progressively colder all day. When I saw her on the ridge, I thought, Sarah's really cold. I wonder what she's going to look like at Chin Scraper, which is where I found you. You were going into that final like 1.5 climb before descending basically to the final aid station. Not an easy place to get to. The crew that was working there could drive within about a 1/4 mile, but there's a washout on the road, so they have to park below the washout. And so we knew that Sarah was getting there and was going to be cold. And so we decided kind of uniformly that they would try to warm her up, but they would probably pull her there. And that would mean that someone from the volunteer team would need to walk her down to the car and then drive her down another like 1.5 mile, like muddy dirt road, where I would then pick her up and bring her to the finish line. And so we got her there. We got some tea in her. We got a bunch of space blankets on her, but it wasn't a place to hang out. Like it wasn't a good place to hang out. And it was kind of a hard place to get out of. But there were a couple of runners coming out of the race at that point. So I did play emergency ambulance, and we got another jacket on her type of thing. I ran down, warmed back up because I was shivering at this point, warmed back up, got our car, went to where the first aid station location had been for you guys. And I picked up Sarah along with another runner and brought them back to the finish line, which was great because it meant that I got to park at the finish line. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was a hard day for a lot of people. It took a long time to warm athletes up. I thought Claire DeVoe was winning.
Yeah,
I drove in, I was like, Claire DeVoe is gonna, back-to-back champ. Like how cool, looked so good. When I saw her heading up Chin Scraper, apparently she then started to vomit. And then she was leading once she hit the final aid station. And somewhere between the final aid station and the finish line, she came off the course and was driven into the finish.
Yeah.
And she like wasn't mentating normally for a while. Like she was like very, very hypothermic. And that was a number of athletes that, so Sarah Beal was in that boat. Claire DeVoe was in that boat. We had one other woman who was running in the top 5 most of the day. Also in that boat, Barrett Gray ran to the final aid station and then turned around and came off the course as well because she too was so hypothermic that she was like her vision was getting weird and she was super lightheaded.
Really?
So
Yeah.
it was nasty out there. It was the survival of the fittest. When I saw Claire Rhodes, who ultimately finished second, I said, Claire, these are Alaskan conditions.
Yeah, exactly. Both Claire Rhodes and Tracy Knopp weren't even wearing jackets. It was like, come on, this is summertime in Alaska.
They were cold when she saw Tara Fraga at the final aid station. She just said, I'm so cold. And Tara was like, you got to keep running. I don't have anything for you besides this water bottle.
Yeah, it's funny because when I saw you, when we were like handing off Sarah so that you could go save the day, I was like, should I wait for Sarah to get here so I could get my jacket back so I could go over the top of Chin Scraper? You're like, no, you'll be fine. And
you'll be okay.
Sure enough, ended up coming over the top. And at that point, the rain had kind of stopped. And it was sort of bad luck for both Claire and Sarah and Barrett, I suppose, in this case, too, where when I came upon Sarah, she's like, oh, man, like, I'm so bummed. I was feeling so good. I'm feeling so fit. Didn't expect the cold was going to take me out. And she specifically said I shouldn't have ditched my jacket at the first aid station. So on that really fast for opening 10K, it's easy to warm yourself up from the inside. So ditching the jacket early, just sort of a critical but understandable mistake for Sarah. And the comment I made is that, man, these things are just never not complicated, like. And
for those who are like kind of questioning, like, well, it wasn't that. No, it was like 30 to 33 degrees, 99% humidity, and actively trying to snow at the high point of the course. And then
it was kind of windy up top too.
It was very, oh my goodness. We were at the intersection between Middle and Lower Ridge where I saw you in the woods there. And we were freezing. Like we were running around in circles trying to stay warm in that section because the wind was gusting. And because it was so wet, it was very slick, which meant that you couldn't really keep your momentum on the upper and middle section of the ridge either. So you guys got your body temps up, running up Cleater, right? It's a nice, good grinder all the way up to the top. And then you guys slowed down on that ridge section. And so you guys couldn't stay warm, basically. And so we saw a lot of runners actually get really cold and kind of like stutter through that ridge section and try to warm back up on the Lost Lake climb, but it just wasn't quite enough. And then the humidity in that zone just does you dirty. I went for a run on the northern section of the Chuckanuts on Friday when I got into town, and it was a nice day. It was like sunny out, but there was still grapple on the trail from Thursday. And I was in a t-shirt, and it was cold in the woods there. Like it was just, the humidity is high. The dew point is weird. You get really, really cold really, really fast. And it took a number of people out. I mean, Chris Meyer, who ended up winning the race, ran all day in a jacket.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, classic springtime conditions in the Pacific Northwest. Chrissy made the comment that they've had great luck with weather since the pandemic. So they were due for a wet and cold one, which we got this year. But holy smokes, what a great race. What a cool town Bellingham is. I've been wanting to visit that place for many years at this point, and Chuckanut gave me the perfect excuse to finally do that. I splurged on a fancy hotel. Ooh. I had an amazing weekend. I finished a 50K and managed to, get through it without getting hypothermic myself. But unbelievable racing in tough conditions. And speaking of which, we should probably go through some of the results now. The finishing times indicate that it was a tough and slow year. So even with some amazing performances, if you stack it against last year's times where Francesco Pupi and Claire DeVoe were the Chuckanut champions, this year was a little bit slower. Chris Myers finished 3 hours, 39 minutes, a full 10-minute victory for Chris Myers in front of Carl Ogston, a Canadian who was in 3 hours, 49 minutes. Third place, Andrew Reilersdam, my guy from Portland, Oregon. I have a good story about him. He's coming to the Gorge 100K in a couple of weeks, trying to get one of those spots on Team USA. So that's the men's podium. I'll just see the women real quick and then throw it to you, Corinne. Jade Bellsberg, awesome run from her. Second place here last year, finishes first this year, 4:22.40. Claire Rhodes only 2 minutes back, 4:24.44. And then Sarah Carter, a new name to me, sort of an up-and-coming youngster from the trail team, 4 hours, 29 minutes. So only 7 minutes separating the women's podium. Comments on the podiums? Sarah
Carter's been more of a short distance gal, I think, coming out of collegiate track and field and cross country into trail running. So excited to see her step it up to the 50K. She's an athlete who started in a crop top and actually finished in a rain jacket. So I was excited to see her layer up out there. Jade Bellsberg ran all day in a rain jacket from start to finish. Claire got it done as well. I mean, it was interesting, actually. I was out there in part cheering really loudly for a local. Sarah Paxson and her husband were both racing, and we were hoping that they would be the dual Masters champions. I think Spencer got by Ryan Smith in the Master Men's category, but Sarah Paxson, who's a local PT, mom of two, finished fifth, I want to say, in like 4:35. Was the top Masters woman on the day. And just to bring this full circle to the trail community, Sarah Paxson was Heather Jackson's college roommate at Princeton, where they both played hockey together.
No way. I finished just ahead of her.
Yeah. She's wonderful. We lived with her and her husband when we first moved to Bellingham, and they were not runners. Sarah was an epic mountain biker. Her husband was racing mountain bikes with my husband. And so to see them both get into running has been really, really cool to watch. Yeah. So they had a good day out there. But yeah, the fields, it was interesting because the fields really changed a lot in the final 10K. Sarah Carter was not on the podium going into the final 10K. Yeah. Jade was not winning going into the final 10K, and talking to the women that came off the course due to hypothermia, they all said the same sort of thing. It was really good until it wasn't. All of a sudden I just kind of shut down. And so it definitely took a toll out there. I felt horrible for 2 days, and I'm going to chalk it up maybe to also being cold during Chuckanut. But it was really impressive though to see, Chris run so strong off the front with really no competition, and in really, really hard conditions. And he pushed as hard as he could. He fell apparently, I think, on the interurban and came in just covered in mud. So he definitely put in a solid effort. And as always, it's one of my favorite events, looking through Summer Kreisman's photos from the finish, and just so all good. The hugs. I got to hug Gus Gibbs. I got to help Matt Seidel not fall over. It's a great finish line. Chrissy and her whole team do an amazing job. And hopefully next year they'll be back to sunshine. But who knows? Maybe this means Gorge has to have good weather
Yeah. Okay. So a couple fun closing comments for me. It felt like sort of serendipitous and poetic in some ways, in that out on the course, I'm reconnecting with people from like my earliest days in trail running, like Nicodemus De La Rosa, a Barkley finisher, which is a good segue to something we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But one of the guys who was my age coming into the sport in the late aughts, sort of like the younger crowd that was discovering trail and ultra running at a time when it was at the bottom of what has been this massive growth curve. And then as I left that chin scraper aid station to go up the climb, the person in front of me turns around just to chit chat. Turns out it's Nick Petitella.
No way.
Who I discovered as I was becoming a huge trail nerd and fan in 2007 when he won the Silver Rush 50 miler 18 freaking years ago. And so he was an early inspiration for me too, and a friend from Boulder, but we haven't caught up in a long time. And so he made the comment like, oh yeah, times have changed. We're sort of like mid-packers here slogging our way through Chuckanut. So anyway, it was fantastic just to be able to sort of still be out there with people who I've known for going on 20 years now and who were early inspirations for me. And we're all still out there getting it done. And then the funniest part was immediately upon finishing, I had to hustle back to my hotel room to jump on a Western States board call for the majority of the afternoon. So I was just
amazing.
laying in a hotel bed on Zoom, just basking in the glory of the 2025 Chuckanut. Anyway, great weekend. I would recommend going to do that amazing early season race anytime.
Final thing, it's a great, if you've never done a 50K, it's a great first 50K. They also allow an early start. So there's a 1 hour early start that you can take at the race as well if you're worried about time cutoffs. And I think it's like 750 runners now, which is huge. It's massive. They really put on a community race that is really, really impressive. So if you're looking to come out to the PNW for an early season 50K, put it on your radar for next year, because it is always it's a staple. It's a historic race. It's been around for forever. Everyone who's everyone, I think, has done it. Now that Dylan has run it, everyone who's everyone has run it.
Yeah, right.
We'll get Courtney DeWalter out there next year, maybe. But it's a fun event, even when the weather is absolute garbage.
Yeah, such a great weekend. I got a 5 miler in this morning, Corinne, so
nice.
I'm back on it now. Keeping the momentum going. It feels great.
Good.
All right, moving on. The Barkley Marathon started this morning, Corinne. Frozen Head State Park in Tennessee. Of course, this legendary event has captivated the imagination of people around the world, popularized by Netflix documentaries. The Where Dreams Go to Die documentary by the Ginger Runner sort of really helped to cement the legacy and the legend of this event. And many brave souls are slogging their way around this race that is meant to be as close to impossible as ever. Of course, last year, what did we have? 5 finishers last year?
Historic, yeah. Most finishers ever. There's a lot of speculation of will it be extra hard this year because of it.
Say.
They had kind of a late start, like 11:30 a.m. Eastern
local time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a late start. The conditions look good right now. It's always a funny race too, because you don't really know who's in the race until the race gets going, unless someone has outed themselves ahead of time. So we know that John Kelly is back in the race. Like that was kind of announced ahead of time. But like, interestingly, like the most interesting name I think that's on the list right now, well, outside of Claire Banworth, who just also I think has been identified in the race, but Max King.
Let's go.
Is a first-time Barkley attempter, I think, this year. I don't think he's made one attempt, it looks like. Or maybe this is his first attempt.
I would think it's his first attempt.
I think it's his first attempt. And he's done a lot of like Rogaine racing, which is a type of adventure racing, a type of orienteering as well. So Max King is distinctly well suited to potentially at least get a fun run in this year. So we'll be keeping our eyes peeled as that race unravels, maybe is a better way to put it. And I do know that Keith Dunn is back doing his normal coverage type thing over on Blue Sky this year. So go follow Keith Dunn and the hashtag BM100, because you know it's going to get interesting.
Okay, he is still doing it on Twitter/X. I've got his account up in front of me now, but as you said, this is going to be where everybody is glued, locked and loaded for the next 60 hours as we see if there are going to be any finishers at the 2025 version of Barkley. I'm going to just read one of his posts here about the weather, because we all know that that's one of the complicating factors of the Barkley. He says, weather, : it was cold last night, very clear. Right now, sunny and warming up. It's supposed to get into the high 60s, low 70s today.
Whoa.
Tonight will not be as cold as last night. Rain is not expected until tomorrow evening. So maybe Laz is throwing that curveball in. It's like, okay, the rain is going to start on the second night at 48 hours. Give them the first couple of days to think it's going to be an easy one, and then right into the teeth of a Tennessee rainstorm after 48 hours. We'll see here who survives. Yeah. Sociopathic or what?
Always sociopathic. Aurelian Sanchez is also back in the race this year. I think this is his third run there. So it'll be good. It's always good, even though it's weird and even though it's out there. And I'm excited to see kind of as they start to ID other runners who is actually out there on course. But John Kelly is back. Max King making his debut. Super, super interesting.
So cool. And we'll remember last year, Barkley always is a big moment in trail news in any season. But last year, of course, Jasmine Paris shocked the world. And I remember just like the internet exploding when she became the first female finisher. And it sounds like she's not back now, maybe still recovering from getting through the course with only 90 seconds to spare in the 60-hour cutoff in 2024. Yeah.
After multiple attempts. And I would like to say that my toxic trait is once a year, I am convinced that I could do Barkley. That's my toxic trait. Once a year, I'm like, ooh, Barkley 2026? And then I'm like, no, that's crazy.
All right. Well, the Barkley's going on. I'll make sure to link to Keith Dunn's Twitter profile here in the show notes so that people can go stay tuned. I'm sure you already are, but a good place to follow along. Where should we go next? Rod Farvard?
Yeah, the boy's back.
Cool. Rod Farvard is back. I thought this would be a good thing to put on the docket here today. Of course, Rod had an incredible season in 2024, won at the Canyons 100K. That got him his golden ticket to the Western States 100, where we'll all remember he and Jim Walmsley had an incredible duel going 85 miles, effectively trading lead back and forth. Ultimately, Jim got the better of Rod, who still finished in, I think it was the third fastest time in race history. And he had sort of like a 15th place performance at CCC coming off of Western States. And then I don't think he's really done much since, but he went back to Santa Barbara, where he went to school, and of course also the home of Decker's HQ, the owner of Hoka. And he took down a Jim Walmsley course record at the Santa Barbara nine trails. What do you think, Corinne?
Yeah, a really, really impressive run there. I think it's funny to say Rod is back. It's like Rod has kicked off his season well. I don't think he, in a lot of ways, has gone anywhere. I think that like Hail Mary to go to a UTMB finals race was kind of a hard push for the dude last year, as a like just like coming off a really, really strong early season with back-to-back 100K performances into Western States. That's a lot for anyone. We like to, heroics are done in the sport a lot, but they're not always the best for us. So taking some time is in a good spot. Winter training has seemingly gone really well. And to take down a Jim Walmsley course record is always a good day. It's like the Killian records and the Jim course records are pretty good feathers in the hat when it comes to kind of leveling up or saying, yeah, like I'm here. He ran a really good, like pretty even splits to get that course record. Looked really strong. It's a pretty technical 35 miles. So was really impressed to see that, given that he was going to be running solo for the most part.
Yeah, he won by 51 minutes.
Just alone. He won alone.
Yeah, the year in 2019 when Jim set that course record, it was sort of a who's who. In fact, I'll pull it up now. Yeah, it was so in that race was Jared Hazen, Chris Brown, Rod Farvard, Jimmy Elam, Cody Reed, Eric Sensman, Jeff Stern, Tim Frericks. So 2019, Jim won by, looks like about 10 minutes in front of Jared Hazen that year, running 5:12. Rod Farvard lowered that by 4 minutes, finishing in 5:08. But unlike
in a time
Jim,
trial,
he was not challenged. Yeah, so good on Rod for pushing himself to that level of performance, taking down a Walmsley course record. A good indication that Rod Farvard's winter training has been going smoothly, and still only 28, 29 years old. Rod Farvard is going to be one of the names that we're going to be monitoring throughout the year, but especially at the Western States 100. Do you know if Rod is doing anything else, plans to do anything else between now and the Western States? In fact, you know what it is, Corinne?
Oh,
Canyon's 50K this year.
Yeah, that 50K field is stacked, and it's a lot of guys and gals who are setting up for the big day at Western States.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's exciting to see.
Shout out to Rod Farvard. Again, sort of like an under the radar race. I've heard that Santa Barbara 9 Trails event is great. I've heard that route is just a great training option for people who find themselves on the central coast of California.
It's steep, it's punchy, it's rocky in a lot of places.
It's technical too. Yeah. Compared to Northern California, like where I live, definitely technical and challenging. So Rod Farvard back on the racing circuit. Great to see. Love to see it. And moving to another big piece of news involving a superstar male athlete, Anton Krupicka, Corinne, in a different phase of his career than Rod, but no less inspiring and relevant in the sport, re-signs a partnership with his long-term sponsor, La Sportiva. I thought this was really cool and a good model for other brands to use in terms of how to stay engaged with an iconic athlete throughout different chapters of their careers. Do you have any comments you want to share on this?
Yeah, I know. I think it's one of those things where it's like, is he staying relevant, or is it the sport finding better and better ways to make sure that we're keeping these quote unquote legacy athletes in a position that makes sense, that's valuable to the brand, that's valuable to the sport. And I do think that Anton's kind of come to a place where it does really feel like that. Like, it doesn't feel like he's chasing any ghosts. It feels like he's doing what he wants to be doing in a way that's authentic to him and to a brand that he's been with for forever at this point.
Yeah. I'm going to just read a quick little excerpt from the post that he put up here, because I think it's great. What he says is, I'm honored to announce that after being sponsored by La Sportiva for the past decade, I will be continuing to work with La Sportiva in a newly defined long-term partnership. It allows me to remain an athlete while also occupying an expanded role in trail running and approach product development and representing the brand through community engagement and adventure storytelling. So no longer, in all likelihood, having a lot of his contractual obligations be performance related. It sounds like maybe he'll be taking on, official new work as it relates to things that he's already so gifted at. I mean, adventure storytelling is kind of what put Anton on the map. In addition to being a great racer in his early 20s, he also prolifically just documented everything in a way that captured the imagination of thousands and thousands of people. I think both of us included, Corinne. And I'm sure, as it relates to product development, there's nobody who's more of like a Swiss Army knife, interesting athlete who really fits what La Sportiva is, like Anton does. Obviously, he's known for spending a lot of time on the bike, which isn't necessarily La Sportiva's bread and butter, but also, a lot of scrambling, rock climbing, like legit fast mountaineering, ski-mo, all of these things really core to the Italian DNA of La Sportiva. So, and it's cool to see. I mean, he mentions this in the post too, but he was sponsored by La Sportiva going back 20 years when he first won the Leadville 100. And then, of course, he had that chapter with New Balance when, minimalist footwear was kind of all the rage, and where Anton sort of became more or less the figurehead of that movement, and led to them commercializing a bunch of different products that were wildly iconic in the sport at that time, before rediscovering sort of a new aspect of himself as more of a mountain athlete and reconnecting with La Sportiva. It's kind of an interesting career arc, and it seems like it's moving into another new chapter.
Yeah, I think it's super smart. I think brands finding a way to keep their athletes is important, because I think of like what I'm doing with my career right now too, finding like still being an athlete, but finding other ways to utilize my skills within a brand structure is incredibly important for like the long-term, like my long-term longevity, my involvement in the sport. You saw that with Courtney's newest agreement with Solomon as well, that she'll move into a kind of sports marketing product role at the end of 2027, 2029, something like that. So it's like, it's one of those things where it is, I think that is really, really valuable for the brand, for brand buy-in, for validating the product. It's the people who can talk the talk and walk the walk. And that is, I think it's a good strategy to do that and keep those athletes really invested and engaged in the product long-term.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, congrats to Anton. Congrats to La Spo. It's cool too. La Sportiva just opened, I think, like their new flagship US store in Boulder. And I think their North American offices are in Boulder too. So Anton, of course, has lived there for a long time. So I wonder if maybe there's something there too, just having that footprint in Boulder and doing things around what the brand and what Anton are so skilled and passionate about in that sort of hub of mountain sport, probably in the short and long-term plans for this partnership too.
Yeah.
Cool. So a couple more things to get to before we wind down. Interesting news on the Trailcon front, Corinne. Official partnership with Broken Arrow and Western States. Do you mind if I tell you about it a little bit?
Yeah, tell me about it.
All right. So this was something that we have been thinking about and talking about for a long time. And one of the big motivations around Trailcon is to bridge the gap between Broken Arrow and Western States. Of course, those two amazing events happen on back-to-back weekends. They probably need no introduction to our viewing and listening audience here. Broken Arrow has really become a marquee, landmark North American race in its own right, sort of celebrating more the short and mid-distance trail running. Western States, the oldest, most iconic 100-miler in the sport. So just a lot of different ways to engage with trail running between the two events. Of course, it also brings together so much of the trail running industry, the media, coaches, brands, professional athletes, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of the whole idea of Trailcon, putting it in between Broken Arrow and Western States, was to hopefully have something that feels like a unifying 10-day celebration of trail running. Of course, 3 independently owned operations between Broken Arrow, Trailcon, and Western States. But what could we do to work together to make this a 10-day celebration of the sport? And so last week we announced that partnership is now official. Of course, Brendan Madigan, who's the co-founder and race director of Broken Arrow, is also a partner in Trailcon. So that part was simple in terms of engaging in partnership. But perhaps more importantly was engaging with the Western States organization. And I should say that I recused myself. I was not involved in any of the conversations as a member of the Western States board. So Brendan and Doug engaged with Western States to figure out how we might be more supportive of that event. And of course, just having the endorsement, the blessing, the belief of the Western States organization to engage in partnership with us is a massive vote of confidence for our vision. And, obviously helps to further establish the foundation of credibility that we want Trailcon to have. So anyway, after the announcement of On being the title sponsor of Trailcon, now also announcing that Trailcon's in partnership with Broken Arrow Western States, big news. So hopefully adds like a unifying feeling to the week. Like I said,
I think it's important given that, there's a little bit of separation in space from Broken Arrow to Trailcon as far as like how it plays out in the week, but it really does like come right up to the Western States rollout in a lot of ways, and that kind of like lead in on Thursday, Friday. And so I do think having that kind of like symbiotic relationship is really important for all parties involved, because you don't want to be stepping on toes. You want it to be additive. You want everything going on that week to be additive of one another, as opposed to in conflict or who's got the shiniest object feel. So I do think it's a really good path forward for all parties involved.
Yeah. Well, appreciate you saying that. And, Yeah, I think from our perspective, just like how do we create something that for the people who, we all know Western States is really hard to get into, but it's such a fun place to be and to experience even without running the race. So what can we do to enhance the experience of people who just want to come be there for Western States? How can we make it so that folks who are coming just for Broken Arrow have something that maybe they can extend their stay for to, engage with the sport a little bit more, a place for the brands to showcase their products, for athletes to learn, for freelancers to network, for the trail community to come sort of help mold the future of the direction that the sport is going globally. So we're making big strides on that with Trailcon here in 2025, and we're grateful to be in partnership with both Broken Arrow and Western States to make it happen. So anyway, there's going to be more news on the Trailcon front in the coming weeks. So we're very excited about it, and we would encourage everybody who's interested to go register. It will sell out, and registration is free. So you can find that at trailconference.com. I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes. Moving on, Corinne, we got races this weekend. We talked about them last week, Chianti and the Big Alta. You and I were texting this morning about Kilian's status. You want to share some of that with the audience?
Yeah, we've just all been wondering. Kilian did kind of publicly say at the end of February that, Chianti is the goal. It's right around the corner, but that he and Emily would be welcoming their third child into this world around that same time. And so if that were to happen, what would that mean for him being at Chianti? And he is still at home in Norway as of today, which does raise a few eyebrows as far as I know the race is Saturday, so there is time to travel to Chianti, but it does make me go okay, what are we? He also is a little bit Strava dark the end of last week too. Social's been quiet on both their fronts. So I'm is there a new baby in the picture right now? And is Kilian going to be doing Chianti with a 1 week old at home? I don't know the answer to that. I haven't pestered. I haven't pinged my Rumsdalen contacts to be so is there a third child yet? Giving them the privacy that they deserve. But that is kind of the big question mark still, is that Kilian does still appear to be at home in Norway. And we do know that it is very likely if he cannot do Chianti, he will try to come to Canyons at the end of April, which I'm not saying that I want him to run Chianti and not come to Canyons. I would love to have him at Canyons. You and I would benefit from that greatly. Yeah. But that is kind of a big question mark right now that remains to be seen.
Yeah. So, the Instagram account, Les Genoux dans le Gif?
Yes.
It's this great, hilarious French trail running account.
They don't always translate well, but I imagine it's funny all the time.
Yeah, so I just translated the caption from their post this morning. I feel like it'll be fun for the audience here. So what they said is, it's a picture of Kilian's latest Strava showing that he's still in Norway a few days before Chianti. It says, the universe is holding its breath. Is Kilian Jornet coming to Chianti? Will the medieval jute take place? Will the game boss put the big rod Vincent Bouillard and the Lord Jim Walmsley behind his back? Will Chianti become a good wine? Is life worth living if it doesn't? So I think the translation is pretty rough there on the Instagram app, but you get the spirit of is he going to do it or not? And is life worth living if this battle between Jim Walmsley, Vincent Bouillard, and Kilian Jornet does not take place this weekend?
Love the stick at Chianti as a wine as well. Will Chianti become a good wine? Is life worth living? I do think that those are the questions that we are asking ourselves as well. And again, bias, would love to see him at Canyons. It'd be much easier for him to run Chianti being close to home. Because what happens to the Western States story? We've been building up this Western States story of this is the hero. The women's race is we'll be crowning a new hero. Yeah. Very exciting. The men's race is we'll be the women's race is we're creating a hero. There are a bunch of really talented women and there'll be a new champion. The men's race is the who's who of previous champions or people tapping at the door. Does that narrative change if Kilian Jornet does not race Western States this year? Like, does that ruin all of our, like, I mean, the men's race is still going to be phenomenal, but does that ruin some of it? Like not having Killian, like not having that final puzzle piece come together?
Yeah. I mean, ruin is a big word.
Strong.
Obviously having Killian there would be fantastic. I think it'll still be the most exciting men's race in Western States history, even without him. But with him, of course, the GOAT, the 2011 champion of Western States, if he was able to come back 14 years later, of course, still racing as one of the top athletes in the sport. It's an incredible testament to just how great of an athlete Killian is to be so good for such a long period of time. And it is also the 15-year anniversary, Corinne, of the unbreakable year, 2010, where Killian finished third place between Jeff Rose and Anton Krupicka. So 15 years after the unbreakable year, it'd be quite a way to celebrate that anniversary to have him back. You know, the field is really good. We talked about this on last week's show, Corinne, but I mean, outside of Killian, Jim, and Vincent, I mean, Andreas Reiterer, very good athlete, especially in these 100K races. Lambert Santelli, a great athlete from Corsica, who I've raced a couple of times and who broke Francois' FKT on the GR20 in Corsica. Zach Garner from Utah, good athlete. Luke Grenfell-Shaw from the UK. Tom Jolly, you mentioned him last week.
Yeah, so, I told him I'd learn how to pronounce his last name if he gets into Western States. Because I think I pronounced his name like 4 ways on the last episode. And he's like, Corinne nailing the pronunciation of my name. And I was like, we'll like narrow the selection of pronunciations if you get a golden ticket, bud.
Yeah. Yeah, and then women's side, we'll just repeat this for the audience. Again, we talked about it last week, but Azara Garcia, Abby Hall, Fiona Pascal, Aroa Co, Joanna Antila, Dominica Stelmach, Amanda Basham, Claire Banworth, who we think is at Barkley.
Yeah, she's a little busy right now. We're pretty sure she's at Barkley.
All right, well, we'll have to get in touch with Travis, get her off that start list.
Yeah.
Anyway, Chianti is going to be awesome, but you know what else is going to be awesome, Corinne?
The Big Alta.
Mother bleeping Alta. And we can close here, but we don't need to do a big preview of it because we'll ultimately do that on the Trailgating shows. So just want to sort of tee it up for our viewers and listeners here. As we're recording this, it's Tuesday, March 18th. We'll probably be putting this podcast up same day, looking ahead a couple of days. Actually, tomorrow is really when Big Alta Week starts on Wednesday, the Trail Running Film Festival happening in here in Marin, just down the road from SFRC. And then Thursday, we have an early packet pickup at the Goldwyn store in San Francisco. Goldwyn, one of our partners on the Big Alta. And then Friday's like the major packet pickup, and we'll do our pre-race show, Trailgating and pre-race athlete interviews. And then race days, Saturday, Sunday, 50K on Saturday, 28K on Sunday. Really good races in both fields. Have you looked at the start lists recently, Corinne?
I haven't. And also, who you trailgating with? Tell us who you're doing the shows with.
I mean, come on down. You're always
like, book
welcome.
a flight right now.
I think David Lamb and Patty O'Leary are gonna.
Oh heck yeah! They are good banter.
Yeah. So obviously, icons in the Marin trail running ecosystem. But really good races, both 50K and 28K, both in the men's and women's races. So we are honored to have, some of the top pros in the sport coming to start their seasons with us, including, I don't know if you saw, but this morning, Corinne, Ryan dropped a video of
David's workout
in Boulder, which was a fun way to sort of see where he's at. Of course, his YouTube series has been wildly popular, and so ours is a bit of a companion piece as he was, doing a specific workout for our race. But great to have David Roche in the field. Last year's men's champ, Eli Hemming, is back. Eddie Owens just jumped in last week.
Heck yeah. Dude is fast. Under the radar for much of our audience, but he is a Bay Area stud, Dipsy champion, real good at going up TAM. He's got a bunch of CRs all over the Headlands area. He's one to keep an eye on. When he's healthy, he is very, very strong.
His first 50K. Yeah.
That's a huge deal. That's really exciting.
Yeah. So anyway, again, we'll do more banter around this on our Trailgating show on Friday. And what we're doing, Corinne, I guess I should say this too, is we are unable to do a full broadcast like we did last year. Of course, Mountain Outpost was a fantastic partner in bringing the inaugural edition of the Big Alta to life, because we have significantly reduced sponsor commitments for the race. We can't afford a full broadcast, so we're going to just try these daily shows. So we're going to be out on the course all day, just capturing photos and videos, and then we'll convene Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for daily shows about what happened at the Big Alta. So condensing, instead of a live broadcast, condensing the races into like a 40 to 60 minute recap show with champions interviews and just banter about how things went down. So it'll all be living on the Freetrail YouTube channel and in the podcast feeds, so people can come hang out with us during the Big Alta.
Super. I'm excited.
And you know what, Corinne? The weather forecast looks good. Knock on wood.
Chef's kiss.
We paid our dues last weekend.
Yeah, it's one of those things where these early season races can go one of two ways. One, they can be really, really hot, like surprisingly hot. They can be perfect, or they can be really wet and really cold and just kind of nasty. So I'm really happy that it's going to be a good show for everyone involved. I know Keely is very much looking forward to the weather not being awful.
Yes. Let's go. Can't wait to see Keely.
Sweet.
Cool. Anything else we need to catch up on?
No, let's just keep our eyes, glued to Killian's Strava, I guess. And I'm really looking forward to getting to rap about Big Alta, about Chianti, about, those like next couple golden tickets being claimed. We're in a really exciting phase of the season where there's still a lot right around the corner. I mean, they just announced, actually, this is something that's like very quick, that the American Trail Running Association changed the timeline for resume applications for the long trail team in particular. Basically, before it was like end of June, because that tied into Broken Arrow, which is the short trail team naming. So they modified the resume spot, which I think is really, really smart, because people want to plan. They want to know, like, am I running Western States? Am I running CCC? What am I doing this summer? And so like they will run Gorge. And then basically that week, the applications are due for resume spots.
Yep.
And then they'll be able to announce in April, by the end of April, who is making the long team. And I think that is so critical for the US to send a super strong team to Worlds in September. And I'm really happy that they did that, but it is a big change. So if you are listening to this and you are one of those athletes who's either racing Gorge or will be submitting a resume spot for the US team, that deadline has changed, and it is now due right after the conclusion of Gorge weekend.
Yeah. It reminds me, did you see Caleb Olson's Substack?
I listened to his interview with Finn post-race, and he was really hoping that he could get a resume spot and therefore not have to run Western States, because he is going to be a dad in like 5 weeks, I want to say.
Yeah.
And so he was like, yeah, if the next race I do is Worlds, that would be ideal.
Yeah. So he posted on his Substack newsletter titled "Now What?" after his big win at Trans Gran Canaria, but he makes an argument that I think is actually a good one. I'm just scrolling down. Give me a sec.
He's a great writer.
He says, hot take maybe, but I think it's a disservice to the U.S. team to add any athlete off a resume/application who also plans to race UTMB or CCC 4 weeks before the World Championships, which I think is actually kind of an interesting point, and certainly some you could make a very strong argument for.
Other teams like France and Spain and I think Italy, our biggest, I think actually Australia too, our biggest competitors when it comes to teams medals at World Championships, restrict what their national team athletes are allowed to do within like a 4 to 6 week window of championships. I think if you are on the long trail team for Worlds, there could be an argument for racing OCC, but that is the limit of what I think anyone should be allowed to do going into Worlds.
Yep.
And then I think that if you're on the short trail team, like you shouldn't be at UTMB, because like, I don't think that like doing a 55K and then like 4 weeks later doing the trail marathon at Worlds doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And other nations do that. They do restrict. And so I think Caleb is kind of spot on when it comes to saying like, hey, like if you want to prioritize representing your country and being on this team, like there are responsibilities that go along with that.
Yeah. So in this article, titled What's Next. He is signed up for the Gorge 100K, but he makes it seem like it's likely that he's going to pull his name off the start list and instead submit a resume. And I think his recent performance at Trans Gran Canaria, forget about how great his Western States was last year, gives him a good opportunity to make a good argument for himself to get one of those resume spots, even though we would certainly be sad to not have him at Gorge. Totally understand. I think they're expecting the birth of their kid only 2 weeks later. So
I think him traveling out of state without his wife, who is his chief crew person, who does make that whole ship run so smoothly. I think having to travel to Gorge without her, knowing that she could deliver at any moment, doesn't seem like the best way to go run 100K either. So I think that give that man a resume spot. I think he's clearly a contender for that Worlds team.
Yeah. It reminds me of Black Canyon because I was talking to Jim and he was saying something about we were talking about what he was going to do during the season. He was like, thinking about world champs. I was like, oh, you got to come to Gorge. And he was like, no, I can't do it. Chianti, Western States, etc. But, who knows? Maybe they would take my resume. I was like, yeah, maybe. Yeah. Imagine being on the voting committee and having a resume from Jim Walmsley and be like, nah. I think I'm gonna go
but at the same time,
direction.
Jim can't line up for UTMB and then run Worlds, right? Worlds has to be the priority there. And so it's we could see this is the last thing, and then I promise we'll sign off. We could have a really interesting OCC field at UTMB finals this year, because I think we will have athletes that step down to OCC who maybe aren't traditional OCC racers, who are more in that 100K family because they have Worlds in 4 weeks' time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to what we talked about at UTMB last year, Corinne. I think at the end of the day, the UTMB field and the CCC field will be materially hurt by the fact that the World Championships is happening only a month later. And conversely, the same is true. The World Championships won't probably be quite as strong because of the fact that other athletes are going to be targeting those world final events at UTMB, which makes me even more committed to the idea that the World Championships has to either be in May or in November, December. Those are the two options. It should be on a rotating basis like that.
Yeah. Away from the big conflicts, I think is, because you're right. We did have the Western States Worlds kind of double whammy, unfortunately, with smaller field, smaller athlete, not as many athletes can obviously be into Western States as they could be into UTMB, but same sort of conundrum with it being in June, for example. So we'll maybe figure it out eventually.
Yeah, we'll figure it out eventually.
Okay, well,
there's a lot to be excited about. Barkley's going on. Chianti's starting in just a couple of days, where there's golden tickets on the line. The Big Alta happening here in Marinwood, California. We're going to be trailgating our faces off for the Big Alta. So come hang out with us throughout race weekend. For Corinne Malcolm, I'm Debo. See you next time. Peace out.
Bye.